I never thought working late on a Thursday night would lead to something like this. I was just trying to get through the shift, just trying to earn enough to cover rent and maybe have something left over for groceries. But that night changed everything, not just for me, but for the way I saw him. Ethan and I weren't close. Not really. We worked at the same warehouse, a half-abandoned distribution center at the edge of town that paid like crap and smelled like dust and forgotten promises. I was part-time, mostly nights, unloading trucks and logging inventory. Ethan worked full-time and was always on the floor when I got there, clipboard in hand, radio clipped to his vest. He wasn't a supervisor, but people listened to him more than they did to the actual manager. Ethan was calm, capable. He didn't say much, but when he did, people paid attention. And me? I kept my head down, worked fast, stayed out of trouble. I had no reason to be on his radar. And yet, somehow, I was. "You're late," he said that night as I walked in, 10 minutes past my shift start. My stomach tightened. "Yeah, sorry. Bus was slow." Ethan nodded, scribbling something on his clipboard. "Clock in. We're backed up tonight." That was it. No lecture, no attitude. Just a quiet understanding. That was the thing about Ethan. He never made you feel small. I went about my tasks, unloading the pallets, stacking boxes, scanning SKUs. Warehouse work is physical, mindless. I liked it that way. But even with music in my earbuds, I could feel Ethan's presence when he passed by. Calm, steady, focused. We didn't talk again until break. I was sitting in the back hallway, sipping from a bottle of warm Gatorade, when he walked up. Instead of heading to the break room with the others, he stopped next to me. "You always sit here?" I looked up, surprised. Yeah, it's quieter." He nodded, then leaned against the wall beside me. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just pulled out a protein bar, unwrapped it, and took a bite. "You in school or something?" he asked between chews. "Community college," I said. "Psych major." Ethan nodded like that explained something. "Makes sense," I laughed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You watch people. You don't talk much, but you see everything." That caught me off guard. I didn't think anyone noticed that. I didn't think he noticed me. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't awkward. It was easy. "You ever think about leaving this place?" I asked. I don't know why I said it. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way he looked at me. Not like a coworker, but like someone who actually saw me. "All the time," Ethan said. But then I think, I don't know what I'd do if I did. I nodded. I got that. Completely. When the break was over, he stood up, offered me a hand, and pulled me to my feet. Something about the way our fingers touched lingered a little too long. After that night, things were different. Not in any obvious way. Ethan still clocked in before me, still ran the floor like he was born doing it. But the way he looked at me had changed. Before, it had been polite. Occasional nods, the quick glance you give someone you sort of recognize. Now it was intentional. Measured. I'd catch him watching me across the loading bay, and instead of looking away, he'd hold my gaze like he was waiting for something I wasn't sure how to give. And the strangest part? I didn't mind it. The week went on. We didn't talk much. Small comments during shifts, a nod when we passed, but each time, something unspoken hovered between us. A question neither of us had the guts to ask out loud. It wasn't until the following Thursday that the tension broke. There was a storm that night. The kind that makes the power flicker and the radio static out. Most of the crew had already left, their shifts ending early because the trucks were delayed. But Ethan and I got stuck finishing the last shipment. We were the only two in the building. The rain pounded on the tin roof like a war drum. We were moving a heavy crate together, and I could feel his breath near my shoulder, the heat of his body just inches away. "You good?" he asked, gripping the crate. "Yeah," I said, trying to ignore how fast my heart was beating. We lowered the crate onto the pallet. I stood, brushing off my hands, and when I turned around, he was closer than I expected. Too close. His eyes flicked over my face, then settled on my mouth. "You ever wonder?" He started, then stopped. He looked away, then back again. What? I asked, voice quieter than I meant it to be. If this, whatever this is between us, if it's just me. The air between us thickened. My pulse roared in my ears. No, I said. It's not just you. Something shifted in him then. His shoulders relaxed. His jaw unclenched. He stepped back slightly, like giving me space even as the tension remained. We should finish the shift, he said. But neither of us moved. Ethan, I said, and my voice cracked a little. He looked at me, eyes steady, and I stepped toward him this time. I didn't plan it. I just reached for his hand. And he didn't pull away. We stood like that for a long moment, fingers barely touching, the storm howling outside, the warehouse filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of wet concrete. And then the lights flickered again. The power cut. Darkness swallowed us. I felt his grip tighten on mine. I got a flashlight in the back, he said, voice low. But we didn't move. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The power stayed out, the only light in the warehouse coming from the emergency exit signs and the faint silver glow of lightning behind the storm clouds outside. But even in that dim light, I could feel him, the outline of him, the shape of what this moment was turning into. You okay? He asked, voice quieter now, like he was talking to a version of me that didn't exist when the lights were on. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. For once, I actually meant it. He didn't let go of my hand. Instead, he gave it a small squeeze and nodded toward the back office. There's a backup light in the cabinet. You want to come with? I followed him through the dark, our shoulders brushing once, then again. I didn't move away. In the office, he knelt down, pulled open a drawer, and found a small LED lantern. It flicked on with a sharp click, casting a soft circle of light around us. I stood near the desk, hands in my pockets, trying to look casual when everything in me felt like it was humming. Ethan stood slowly, holding the light. His face was a little softer in this kind of glow, less serious, less guarded. He sat on the edge of the desk, staring at me for a beat before asking, "So, what do we do now?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over, slow and uncertain, until I was standing just a few feet from him. I could see the rise and fall of his chest, the way his jaw tensed like he was holding something back. I don't know, I said. I didn't think we'd ever get here. He nodded. Me neither. I leaned back against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. This doesn't have to mean anything, I said. But the second the words were out, I hated them. Because I didn't mean that. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Doesn't have to, he repeated, like he was testing the words in his mouth. But what if it does? I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't just my coworker. He wasn't just some guy the first shared silent glances with between stacks of inventory. He was a person who had seen me, who had noticed me when no one else did. I think I want it to, I said quietly. He stood, the lantern casting our shadows against the wall. And then, finally, he closed the distance between us. It wasn't a dramatic kiss. It wasn't like the movies. It was hesitant, slow, warm. His hand came up to my neck, tentative like he was still asking permission. I leaned into it. Nothing about this felt like an accident. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. I've been thinking about that for a while, he whispered. Yeah, I said. Me too. The rain eased outside, turning into a soft patter. We should probably pretend this never happened, he said, half joking. Yeah, I echoed, already knowing we wouldn't. The warehouse was different once the lights came back on. Not just brighter, colder, harsher. It was like the moment we had just shared didn't belong here anymore. Like it had slipped through the cracks of a darker world, and now had no place in the fluorescent lit reality we were forced to return to. We didn't talk about what happened. not with words. Ethan handed me the scanner without looking directly at me, but his fingers brushed mine deliberately. His touch lingered for a heartbeat longer than it needed to, and when I looked up, he was already walking away down the row of inventory shelves. I should have felt awkward, exposed even, but I didn't. I felt grounded, like something between us that had always been there, silent and coiled, had finally exhaled. The work felt mechanical after that. We moved in tandem, scanning and stacking, the silence between us filled with charged glances and the soft shuffle of boots on concrete. I found myself hyper-aware of everything. The sound of his breath, the way his shoulders flexed beneath his worn jacket, the way he cracked his neck when he was thinking too hard. It was like discovering a new language, one made of silence, small movements, and almost words. He caught me watching him once. He didn't smile, just held my gaze for half a second too long, like we were both pretending we weren't standing in the aftermath of something big, something that didn't make sense in the world we were used to. Midnight came fast. The storm had eased, but the air still smelled like wet pavement and ozone. The warehouse was finally quiet again. Trucks gone, pallets stacked, inventory logged. Ethan clocked out after me, his ID badge clicking against the scanner like punctuation at the end of a sentence neither of us had finished. I stood by the breakroom door, watching the lights buzz overhead, unsure of what I was supposed to do next. "Need a ride?" he asked, walking past me toward the exit. "Yeah," I said before I could stop myself. We didn't speak on the way to his truck. He walked a step ahead, shoulders hunched slightly, like he was trying to fold into himself. But when we got inside, the air felt heavy again. Not with the pressure of before, but with something softer. Like we both knew we were still in that moment, even if we were pretending otherwise. His truck was old but clean. Pine air freshener hung from the rearview mirror, and a pair of work gloves sat folded on the passenger seat. He brushed them aside before I got in, and for some reason the gesture felt intimate, like making room for someone in your life, not just your truck. The ride was quiet, the kind of quiet that says everything. The city outside blurred past, wet streets reflecting streetlights, neon signs melting into puddles of color. I watched the raindrops race down the window, the way they collided and merged, and for a moment I felt like one of them, pulled into something without knowing exactly where it was going to land. Ethan drove like he worked, focused, calm, one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on his thigh. I couldn't stop stealing glances at him, not because I wanted to, but because not looking felt like ignoring a truth that had already taken root inside me. When he pulled up in front of my building, he didn't put the truck in park, just kept it in idle, his fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel like he was thinking through something he didn't know how to say. "Thanks for the ride," I said, my hand on the door handle. But I didn't move. He looked over at me, finally. His eyes were steady, but there was something vulnerable underneath. A question, maybe. Or a fear. "So," I started, trying to find the right words. "What happens now?" He exhaled through his nose. "I've been asking myself that all night." I nodded, watching him closely. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen," he said finally, voice low. It was a relief to hear it out loud, like I'd been holding my breath and didn't know it. "I don't either," I said. We sat in silence again, the kind that felt different now. Fuller, like we'd stepped through some invisible door together, and neither of us had the map for what came next. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked. I turned to him fully. "You mean outside of work?" "Yeah," he said. "Not with boxes and forklifts between us." That made me smile, and not just the polite kind. A real smile, the kind that surprised me with how natural it felt. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that." I stepped out into the rain without bothering to pull my hood up. It felt good. Honest. Cleansing, in a weird way. I walked slowly toward my front door, the gravel crunching under my boots, and I could feel his eyes on me the whole time, not watching to make sure I got in okay. Watching because he didn't want to look away, and when I finally turned around at the door, he was still there, headlights glowing in the mist, waiting to see if I'd look back. I did. The next day felt different, not because anything huge had happened overnight, but because everything had. I kept replaying the look on Ethan's face in the truck, the way his voice dropped when he asked if he could see me again. That wasn't just a casual offer. It was cautious, almost hesitant, like he'd been carrying that question around for longer than either of us wanted to admit. He didn't text me that morning, and I didn't text him either. Maybe we were both waiting to see who would make the next move. Maybe we both needed a minute to catch our breath, but the silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like a pause, a held breath. That afternoon, just after 3, I got a message. "You free tonight?" My pulse jumped. I stared at the screen for a second too long before I typed back. "Yeah, just me and leftover pizza. Want to hang out? My place?" I swallowed. I wasn't nervous exactly, but it felt like walking towards something that had no rules, no script. I didn't even think twice before I said yes. When I showed up at his apartment around 7, he was already waiting by the front door. He looked relaxed in that Ethan kind of way. Old hoodie, worn jeans, barefoot. There was something jarring and beautiful about seeing him like that, stripped of his work vest and clipboard, without the warehouse walls to hold us in. "Hey," he said, voice quieter than usual. He stepped aside so I could come in. "I made spaghetti. It's not fancy." "I like spaghetti," I said. His apartment was neat, almost too neat, like someone who never quite got comfortable with mess. A clean space, a folded blanket on the couch, a single plant on the windowsill that looked half alive. We ate on the couch, plates balanced on our knees, the TV playing some muted crime show neither of us were really watching. We didn't talk much at first, and that was okay. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It just was. After we ate, he took both plates into the kitchen and came back with 2 beers. "Don't worry," he said with a faint smile. "I didn't lace yours." "Damn," I said, grinning. "Missed opportunity." We drank in silence for a few more minutes, the air getting heavier with every glance, every near touch. The sun had dipped below the buildings outside, leaving the room bathed in soft orange and gray light. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But somehow, we were closer, knees bumping, shoulders brushing, eyes locked like we were both waiting for the other to give permission. "I've never done this before," he said suddenly, and it wasn't just a confession. It was a warning. "Me neither," I said. "Not like this." He nodded, as if that made something easier. And then he leaned in, slow and deliberate, giving me all the time in the world to back away. I didn't. The kiss was different this time, not stolen or tentative like in the warehouse. This one was slow, thoughtful, the kind of kiss that says, "I'm still figuring this out, but I want to figure it out with you." His hand slid to the side of my neck, fingers grazing the skin just below my ear, and I tilted into him without thinking. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could feel it through my chest. When we pulled back, he didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, searching my face like he was checking to see if I was real. "I thought about this all day," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Same," I said. He smiled, small and crooked, the kind that made my throat tighten. We stayed like that for a while, pressed together in the quiet, the hum of the fridge, and the distant city noise outside the only sounds between us. Whatever this was, whatever it was turning into, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something we'd both been walking toward without realizing it. And now, we were here. We didn't rush anything after that. Ethan and I just existed for a while in the quiet, still close on the couch, his leg pressed lightly against mine, but not saying much. It felt like we were both scared to speak in case words ruined the balance of what we'd found. After a while, he stood and grabbed a blanket off the back of the couch, then dropped back down beside me, tossing one side over my lap without a word. It was such a small thing, but it settled something in me. Like this wasn't just some isolated moment, like he was thinking about the part that came next too. He turned the volume up on the TV, something about a detective series he said he half followed when he couldn't sleep. I tried to watch, but my focus kept drifting, his hand resting casually close to mine, the slow, even rise and fall of his chest. "Can I ask you something?" he said, eyes still on the screen. "Yeah. Have you, ever felt this with someone before?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about past flings, casual moments, confusing touches in backseats of cars that never really felt right. Nothing like this. Nothing that felt this steady. "Not like this," I said honestly. He nodded, and then, after a long pause, "Same." We ended up talking late into the night. It started slow, safe topics, movies, high school stories, dumb mistakes from our first jobs. But gradually it shifted. He told me about the pressure he felt from his family, how nobody had ever asked if he was happy, just if he was making enough to pay the bills. I told him about college, how I always felt like I was falling behind, even when no one said it out loud. And then we talked about it. About us. "I don't know what this is," Ethan said at one point, his thumb tracing the rim of his beer bottle. "But I know it's not nothing." "Same," I said. "It's not just a moment. It doesn't feel like a fluke." He looked at me then, and the vulnerability in his eyes was enough to quiet every doubt I'd carried with me. The moment hung there for a second before he spoke again. "I want to see where this goes." "Me too." That was all we needed to say. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the door, hands in his hoodie pocket, shoulders a little hunched like he wasn't sure if he should ask me to stay. I didn't push it. I didn't need to. "We'll figure it out," I said, stepping out into the night. He nodded. "Yeah." The air was cold and clear, and I walked home buzzing, not with adrenaline, not with fear, but with this strange sense of calm. Like something was finally starting that had been waiting for us all along. There was no big declaration, no dramatic kiss in the rain. Just two guys in a quiet apartment on a regular night, figuring out how to start something real. And honestly, that was more than enough. The next week settled into something new. We didn't label it, didn't have a conversation where one of us said, "So are we together now?" It just became this quiet understanding, this shift in gravity. Ethan would text me after shifts, even when we didn't work the same nights. I'd bring him coffee when I passed near his apartment. He started sitting closer, touching more. His hand would land on my knee when we were talking, or he'd brush my shoulder when he walked by, like he was testing how normal it could feel to be close to me. And it did feel normal. Weirdly so. I was at his place more often than mine. We'd cook whatever was left in our fridges, pasta, grilled cheese, frozen dumplings, and we'd eat it on the floor, watching old cartoons or whatever trash reality show he'd found. It wasn't flashy or intense. It wasn't what I thought falling into something like this would be. But it was real. One night, we were lying on his bed, both of us in t-shirts and sweatpants, half asleep under the soft hum of his ceiling fan. I was on my back, and he was lying on his side, one leg resting against mine. He reached over, brushing his fingers through my hair. "You good?" I nodded. "I am now." It wasn't the kind of moment you write poems about. It didn't have fireworks or grand epiphanies, but it meant everything. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, and neither was he. The next big shift came on a Saturday. I had stayed over the night before, and we were just starting to wake up, still tangled up in the quiet, our legs a mess under the sheets, when my phone buzzed. It was a group text from a coworker. "Warehouse barbecue today at 3. Bring whoever." Ethan saw the message over my shoulder. "You want to go?" I paused. "You cool with that?" He nodded. "Yeah. I mean, if you are." And just like that, we weren't just hiding in the silence anymore. We were choosing to be visible. We didn't hold hands at the barbecue. We didn't make a scene. But people noticed. I saw it in the way Omar raised an eyebrow when we walked in together. In the glance Becca gave me when I handed Ethan a drink without asking what he wanted. Later, while we were standing off to the side, Ethan leaned closer and murmured, "They're gonna talk." I shrugged. "Let him." He smiled at that, not a big one. Just the kind of smile that meant he was proud to be here beside me. That this, whatever we were doing, wasn't something he regretted. When we left, walking back to his truck, he reached out and took my hand. no one was around. He didn't do it for show. He just did. That night, lying in his bed again, I asked him the thing I'd been circling around for weeks. Why me? He looked over, blinking slow like the question caught him off guard. I don't know, he said, then corrected himself. I mean, I do. You don't talk just to fill silence. You listen. You see people. You saw me before I even realized I wanted to be seen. I swallowed, throat tight. I didn't think I was the kind of guy someone like you would notice, I admitted. He shook his head, leaning in, pressing his forehead to mine. Then you're not paying attention. And maybe I hadn't been. Not really, but I was now. It didn't fix everything. Life still had stress. Work was still exhausting. We didn't suddenly become some perfect couple who always had the right words. But we kept showing up. We kept choosing each other. One night, a few months in, we were sitting on his balcony with takeout boxes on our laps. The city was buzzing below, distant sirens and soft music floating up from the street. Ethan looked at me and said, I still don't know what to call this. I reached over, rested my hand on his. Call it ours. And he smiled, that same quiet, knowing smile I'd seen that first night in the truck. Whatever this was, it belonged to us now, and that was more than enough.